You've got to set them up for success.
Yeah.
So one of my things, I'll hear a lot of people come to me and say, oh, such and such isn't working out. And I said, well, first of all, let's back off. Before we worry about them, have a look what you do. Have you set them up for success?
Yes.
And sometimes you'll find out, or the company doesn't have to be an individual. Like, so, yep, sometimes people don't work out, but a lot of the times I get more of a thrill when I see we turn someone around, or we turn a division around, or a manager around, because it's very easy to say. It's like, you've got to look at yourself first, or look at the business.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Growth Trust podcast series. In today's podcast, we focus on how to manage growth over the long term, even when fortune throws you curveballs you least expected. Who better to speak to than Darren Thomas, the head of Thomas Foods International, which has achieved sustained growth over many years and has rebounded spectacularly since a fire in 2018 destroyed much of its Murray Bridge plant. This Growth Trust podcast series looks at the issues facing many companies which play such a vital role in the Australian economy, and is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Business Growth. Darren Thomas is the Group Managing Director of Thomas Foods International. Under the stewardship of he and his father, Chris Thomas, who's now its Executive Chairman, the company has grown from a small family enterprise into Australia's largest 100% locally owned red meat processing company. And it's grown steadily despite a devastating setback. Also in the studio with me is Ryan Williams, the Director of the Australian Centre for Business Growth. Well, firstly, Darren, thank you very much for being a part of this podcast. Let's go back to the very beginning. How did the company start under the stewardship of your father, Chris Thomas?
Look, without being too unbiased, it's one of the great untold stories. And a lot could argue we shouldn't have even existed today. But I suppose going back, not right to the beginning, but if I look at my father left school at an early age, I think year 10, he decided, whilst he academically was pretty smart, he always had a love of the land, and I think he took off and jumped on a train and went north and ended up jackarooing for a period of time. He then came down to the southeast and he was doing the same, but at that time he met his, I guess soon to be future partner, Bob Rowe. From jackarooing, he went in to be a stock and station agent, and that's really where this partnership of Bob was a customer of Coles Brothers, a very famous stock and station agent back in the day. And Bob saw the keenness, I guess, and the initiative of Chris and asked them to join TNR Pastoral. Now, TNR Pastoral, whilst that was our name formally before that, that was part of company Turner and Rowe, the original TNR Pastoral, and that was a trading arm of Holbrook Meat, one of South Australia's biggest domestic wholesalers back in the time. And this is sort of in the late 70s, early 80s. So Dad started originally as an employee of the original TNR Pastoral, and in the late 80s formed again the new TNR Pastoral, which was Thomas and Rowe, which was Bob Rowe, Simon Rowe, Bob's son, and Dad. And back then they were really just traders of livestock. We never had any assets. I guess modern day punters, I guess they bought stock in one part of the country and might ship it to Dandenong or to Newmarket at the sale yards because it sounded like a good idea, but they were really modern day, cattle traders. And from there, they sort of started to do a bit of what we call service processing. So at Jepps Cross, which used to be one of Australia's largest meat processing sites. And again, that was back in the late 80s into the early 90s, and went from being a sort of trader into starting to process and export some of their own meat, and also supply a guy by the name of Mike Rankin. Again, he went on, it was one of Adelaide's early sort of wholesalers, and they used to sort of sell some meat to him and started a very fledgling export business. So started as a very small business. I say it was 3 people, but the original office was an Atco hut out at Jepps Cross near the rail siding. And I think you'll know when I do presentations, I show quite an interesting photo of that, but that's where it all began.
So he starts as a jackaroo, goes bush, falls in love with the primary industry that he sees out there and sees an opportunity.
Yeah, I often say he was lucky, and even with a bit of mentoring I do these days to kids, is that you'll find some people just have that passion and understand really what they want to do, and then you'll see a lot of kids that they'll finish university or some sort of trade or apprenticeship and they're still a bit unsure, and neither's right or wrong. I just consider Chris lucky that he had a clear vision. I mean, I think if you spoke to him, be quite honest and say he never envisaged what it would be today, but he certainly had that passion at an early age and knew agriculture was his calling.
So as a young tacker, were you out following him around,
Yeah, so school holidays for me, through the BTEC programs, I say, where there was a lot of cattle sold off in Northern Territory. Dad was a cattle buyer. He'd spend weeks and weeks away without us seeing. We would get home to watch my sport on the weekend, sometimes via the mail plane. Some interesting stories there. But, school holidays for us were usually at Alice Springs.
Yeah.
So I got some fond memories, or during school holidays, I'd be off with him travelling down the southeast to cattle markets. And I'm talking at the age of 6, 7 years old here. So I spent my younger formatives years certainly tagging along behind him. And, I really enjoy it. And as I said, family holidays were driving from Adelaide to Alice Springs, or Alice Springs up to Wyndham, and they were really great times, but it was really centred around Dad's work.
So it sort of starts with the first Atco hut, gradually builds up a bit more. He starts investing more. You mentioned that it went from punting on trading cattle to processing.
Yep.
What was the next leap then to sort of really establish a solid business?
I guess if I look at one stage, Dad and Bob and Simon, we were processing in about 7 different abattoirs around Australia. So late 80s, they formed a joint venture with one of Australia's biggest meat companies, Metro Meat.
Yep.
So they were 50-50. They owned us, I guess, 51-49, but they were a joint venture. And we used to process in their sites in Western Australia, South Australia. So I guess that was the first big step, late 80s, as we moved into, rather than a trader, into what they call a non-packer exporter, where we didn't have the physical assets. And for us, that was one of our key strategies. Was we didn't want the headaches of having all those plants and all the people worries. And when there was lots of livestock around, you could process them. When there was none around, very sharp, small overhead, could pack up shop. And that was a real key strategy. And I know there was never any intention to really own processing plants. Maybe till I came along. And that
kind of capital views then changed, right? So
it certainly has, and and I guess when you look at, I joined the business in the early 90s. You said earlier, I wanted to be a physio when I was at school, and obviously playing football and sport, and I missed out by a mark. And I thank every day that nothing against physios, but a bit like I said before, whilst I'd grown up with it and I had an interest, but it certainly was never laid out that I was to come into the business, nor did I necessarily know that I wanted to come into the business. But it's when I finished school and I was at university and I'd spend a bit more time in the business, out to the markets, you understand it a little bit more. I started to work part-time in the business, and that's when I really became and really understood what we were doing. So through the early 90s, my exposure there was studying and playing football, gave me a great flexibility. I always consider I had a great upbringing, spent a lot of my spare time in the country, but lived in the city. And I guess when I went into the business full-time in those early 90s, I started off as a livestock buyer, no different to my dad, after working in the office. And over the years, I'd worked at the plants. But I guess we had to compete against all these people that had processing plants. They had an advantage to us. Jealous, not the right word, but I'd always be saying to Dad, we should get a plant. It's hard trying to beat these guys when we've got a service process. And one of the defining moments came in 96 when the opportunity came to lease the Samcor plant.
Yeah,
we were already in a small way leasing a bit of an old chiller for a boning room, but the opportunity came to lease the whole plant, so for slaughter.
Because there was a time these assets came up for sale, didn't they, after the State Bank collapse?
Absolutely.
And there was the Asset Management Task Force headed by Roger Sexton. I did a bit of work behind the scenes, doing press releases about asset sales.
Yep.
It was around that time, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So at the time, we had the opportunity to purchase Samcor, and Chris and Bob didn't have the money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't quite know. It might have been a figure around $4 million, whatever it was, that whole site, which is now Harvey Norman. But a gentleman by the name of Roostrom Sardry purchased it. And it was one from left field that the industry hadn't seen, and they knew nothing about running plants. So that's where we got the opportunity, first of all, to set up a service kill there and grow that, but then ultimately lease it. And we really went from overnight, completely upending the strategy to having a small office workforce to all of a sudden extra 250 people.
I was just about to ask the question. So from small hut to however many folks would have been 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever it was, and that
not much more than that.
Yeah.
Now suddenly you're 250, 300, 400, 500. How many people?
Yep, a couple of hundred people, and there was some great lessons. And it was, as I say, luck, but timing's everything too. It was a time when there was if you remember back, a lot of industrial change. So you had Peter Reith and some of the things that were opening up. So we were one of the first companies to use an Australian Workplace Agreement. Little known legislation, but it certainly gave us the flexibility in how we could manage a workforce, because the meat industry over the years had been quite militant.
Yes.
We won't go into the stories, but I remember as a kid seeing caravans and pickets and all that sort of stuff and not really understanding, but we had to learn a lot. I mean, and it's not like we thought we knew it all, but it's very different running a plant to perhaps, service processing.
So, your dad initially has this view that, we sort of work the market and we don't have to take on the stress and overheads and employee issues and all that. But it's the son who comes along and says, Dad, we should really take up this opportunity. Did he ever turn around and say, look what you've done to us? You've changed my life.
It's more than just me. It was, team effort. And when I look at the partnership of Bob and Chris, this lasted more than some marriages. I mean, in 2008, and I'll talk about that a bit later, that we purchased their shares in our own right. But it was always just a set of passion. Again, little knowledge is dangerous, but it was felt like that we needed an opportunity. And without jumping in full on and buying the asset, it was a great try before you buy. And that really led into what I could call the single biggest change in the company's history, was when we got the opportunity. Our joint venture partners, Metro Meat, were owned then by the Chinese, CITIC, who we still have a very good relationship with today, but their advisors said, look, this meat caper, you're not doing so well at it. Maybe you should stick to mining. And we got the opportunity to purchase our first plant outright, which was the Murray Bridge plant, which we'd already service processed. And that was in March 99, and we commenced proceedings again in August 99. So we'd had a couple of years of trying to figure this meat processing caper out. And that was a real big step. And I look at that stage, Dad was about 50 and Bob was in his early 60s. And for them to go all in at that stage of their career, it would have been really easy for them to say, look, let's just stick with Jepp's Cross. But it was too good an opportunity. And Murray Bridge had a rich history of being a bit of a jewel in the crown through the Bartholomeus, Throsbys and the various families that owned it prior to Metro.
Yeah.
It was very well located, and it was a great opportunity for us.
In this podcast series, we've spoken to a lot of people about, how you manage growth. And one of the things, we've been keen to sort of pursue is, how do you keep an eye on growth? Don't grow too quickly so that you lose sense of, what your goals were, how you started. How have you managed that process? Because the growth of this company has been phenomenal.
Yeah, look, it's not easy. And if you ask my staff today, they'll know I'm pretty focused on it, not getting ahead of ourselves. But it's a dichotomy, isn't it? Like, we got aspirations to grow, but you've got to be able to control it. And it comes back to, at the end of the day, when we had a clear vision, I guess, of when we went into processing, what we wanted to do. And as we learnt more about processing, we realised a very capital-intensive industry. So anything that we've ever made is gone back into our business. So that's one way we've funded the growth.
Yep.
Okay. We're pretty conservative, risk-averse, so we don't like to take on a lot of debt. So that's been so that somewhat tempers your growth naturally, because I mean, you can go and borrow money, and I'm not saying we've never borrowed money to make acquisitions that make fit. But the other thing is people. You can grow quickly, and I know what it's like sitting in the seat. If you haven't got people around you, you will grind yourself in the ground. So again, that balance of, overhead, not adding too many people, but realising if you are a fast-growing business or you are going to continue to grow, you do need to invest ahead of time. Sometimes that's in capital, and sometimes that's human capital in talent. So the other ways, it's not easy, and I'm constantly, whilst I can roll off now and say what you should do, what we have done in the past, we've learned some lessons, but at all times that conservative nature has allowed us to grow organically. And I guess when you look at the growth the business has, and then you look at where it's not only has it grown here in Australia, I think now we're the second largest red meat processor, JBS number one, Brazilian owned. US listed, and then under us, you've got American owned and a lot of foreign companies. So we're very proud and take that respectfully, the position we hold. So, but it's the growth overseas as well that's added a new dimension.
I would frame that idea around growth that you described as sort of intentional growth, you're planning to grow at a particular pace and being clear around, there's so many companies will grow too rapidly, they can't keep up with the cash cycle and they flare out, although it was intrinsically a good business.
Yeah.
And you have others that kind of have gotten along with a bunch of happy accidents. When there's a bit of a headwind, they don't actually know what made them successful, and so they can't replicate or work out how to navigate out of it.
It's interesting, your point. Like we've made a couple, like one acquisition, which I won't go into detail, but people think they laugh a bit when I say, we bought it out of administration, but 18 months before it was profitable. And that's the thing, they'd grown too quick. They couldn't manage the cash. So that has always instilled that conservative approach and understanding numbers. Again, when I did accounting, but thank God I wasn't an accountant. No disrespect to all the accountants. But it gives us some great fundamental understanding. And I guess going back to manage that growth is when I did an MBA when I was in my late 20s, probably a bit early, but I learned, to be honest, more off the other students and maybe through the course. But I had this vision of owning the supply chain. And what that meant was it focused in where we were going to grow, trying not to digress too much from that. So if we look at today, our core business is red meat or processing globally. And then also, but our core competency is still, I think, livestock procurement. It's one of the things that's hard to replicate. So having that broad strategy of owning the supply chain, set some guardrails where you do play and where you don't play. Now, we went in on a tangent and bought a produce company, a potato company, and that was quite a successful venture. And when I broke it down, it was, well, they have producers and farmers, they have a production environment, which was the packing shed and customers. Well, there were some retail customers here in Australia. So it wasn't too different to us. It was just a different product. But again, wasn't core and wasn't for us for the long term.
Right. And so you've exited that now?
Yes. Yep. Sold it to someone who loved it. But it was a business that was in distress. Part of my pay is turning around things. And if we look at all the plants that we've bought, the common theme I've tried to look at is good businesses, and you put that in inverted commas, that don't have succession, takes a bit of emotion out of the transaction, but ones that we felt like that we could improve. And they were generally family businesses, not necessarily in distress, but we could see that over our mistakes and learnings for the previous 20 years that we could sort of add some value to. So, I mean, all of our growth has had a reason behind it. And we're not the sort of business that will go in and get a consultant and have this big book of a strategy. I mean, early days at Murray Bridge, we knew we had to invest capital over time, and it was a picture on a wall. And we knew we had to build this part, we had to do that. And it did until the fire. There was one little bit that we hadn't done, but that was our part of our strategy.
I'm fond of saying to folks, people talk to me about how do you grow companies, and I've done a bunch of turnaround work over the years. And so, how have you managed to resurrect so many? I don't think this is a very complicated exercise. The way I think about it is only 3 ways to grow the business. More customers, more money from same customers, or lower costs. Pick a lane.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of reductionist thinking that you can get down to capture something on an A4 page or on a chalkboard or whatever that will serve as enough of a guiding frame. I'm also really interested in that idea of getting clarity on who you are and where you want to go, and therefore how that gives you a filter to say, that stuff's cool, but it's not for us.
We're having that conversation today. I'm constantly reminding our team, what are we? I mean, you're dead right. That sounds like a great opportunity, but is it really what we want to do? We get offered opportunities all the time. It's tempting, but we're there's a new facility building, Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah. Why do you pick that over something else or prioritize it over something? Because that's what we're doing. Retail ready, consumer facing products in the US. It's right in our window.
And you've today there was an announcement in one of the online papers about what you're doing at Tintinara.
Yeah, the feedlot. I mean, that's a great story. That was a small feedlot that we bought, over 10 years ago, a couple of thousand head, moving towards, 30, 40,000 head. And if you look at the thing I'm most proud of, when you look at the knock-on effect, there's 50 or 60 jobs created in a township like Tintinara.
Yeah.
Most people drive past it on the way to Melbourne. But that's all about the supply chain.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily want to be, so if I could put it simply, I don't want to be the farmer. They got a completely different cost-based way of manage capital, labour and all that. A feedlot's that next stuff. We need supply and continuity in our I guess the ecosystem today, particularly in beef, is moving more towards a flattened supply chain, not so reliant on weather. Weather has an impact, and you're seeing that on lambs as well. There's a lot of lamb feeding. If we can control all of that, and I don't want to be the retailer at the end of the day, but theoretically I should have an efficient supply chain. You've got to be efficient as well, but I should be able to pay my suppliers, being farmers. They deserve an income, a fair income, and there should be a value to my suppliers. And that was really a simple strategy. So a feedlot is an integral part of the business and part of the Murray Bridge rebuild. I mean, we invested before Murray Bridge hadn't even started building, and we bought the feedlot with the view to supply Murray Bridge. So they sort of hand in glove.
Well, take us back. We mentioned, the accidents that happened along the way. The fire in 2018, it's devastating. You mentioned you had Jepps Cross was a big change. Then Murray Bridge comes along. It's the big change. Then the fire happens. For many companies, that'd be like, that's it. The whole thing sort of falls in on itself. But
Yep.
you have bounced back exponentially.
Yeah, I remember 3rd of January 2018, hadn't had much of a break, and I was down at the beach and phone rang, said, look, we had a small fire. It's under control. Only for 30 minutes later, back then, Twitter and all these things going, and the fight got complete accident. But I mean, the rest is history. And I remember in that after the press conference the next morning, saying to our team that, we have to split into two groups here because we still had a very big business to run. So first and foremost, so there'll be a group that we need to manage that. Then there's another group of us that are going to have to manage all these proceedings that go along with having a fire. And we're going to have to wear two hats. It's going to be difficult. But when I look back on it without going into great detail, you learn a lot, obviously a lot about insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about how did we mitigate 1,400 people out of a job, customers. We were able to get 2 shifts up and running at Lobethal in a matter of weeks. Our Tamworth plant, we moved 400 people to increase production there. So part of our strategy too, as we've grown, is to have geographic diversity. So you want that in Australia for a couple of reasons. So we can cover as much as the country we can for sourcing livestock, but also, as we know, there's always one part in Australia is dry, drought, somewhere's flooding, could be a fire. So that geographical diversity gave us some backup. We did take a little bit of a hit to our beef because we didn't have another beef plant. We were very fortunate to be able to do a small service kill in Victoria. But during that process, we continued to expand in the US. We opened up a business in China. We acquired Froo Foods, or the Froo stall as it was from Froo. So we didn't rest on our laurels. So we had to and built the world's newest beef plant during COVID, a pandemic. So when you look at at that period,
I remember you mentioned that press conference. I remember you were very forthright about saying that we will be back.
Yeah,
and you made a commitment to the workforce there that, we will not be leaving this. We will be back bigger and
bigger, better, stronger.
Which was a big statement given the flames we'd seen.
I don't know whether this guy hadn't been to bed. I hadn't done too many hour press conferences, but it was funny. A really good friend of mine, Dale Roberts, he put together a number of the media statements over the first 6 months and used the voice overlay from that press conference. And I guess it was just, we knew we had a obligation to all those people that helped us, the township of Murray Bridge, all those employees, through no fault of their own, their life had been turned upside down. So I guess it was just an innate know that, when I rolled off the tongue, bigger, better, stronger, it ended up becoming mandate, a driver for us. And it's something I'm pretty proud because there was lots of, other states wanted us to rebuild over there, passionate, parochial South Australian. So I don't think there was ever a real chance of us leaving the state, but certainly the option was there to do nothing.
Yeah.
And with the consolidation of the beef industry, and as I said earlier, these big international corporates, it's not necessarily a level playing field. So I don't think we're ever in doubt of rebuilding, but I can tell you one thing, had we delayed the decision too much longer and COVID comes along, the escalation in building costs and that, it may not have been possible. So maybe a bit of good luck there. But again, it was a show of our commitment to the industry, to the state, to all the people that helped make us where we were. It was sort of giving back to them in a weird way.
So that's the second set of decision frames, right? So the first one you'd spoken about was this idea of, being tied on focus. So the other one that I talk to businesses about that helps you decide what's on, what's off, what to pursue, what isn't, is that values architecture. And so if you feel that you're committed to local community, or if that's something that's, a strong driver, or, people first, whatever the verbiage is, it makes some of those decisions a little easier. There may well have been one that, had you rebuilt interstate, who knows, maybe you would have added a 0.5 point of margin or something like that at some point in time, or somebody else has funded the capital and you had a bit more cash laying around. But the idea that you'd sacrifice, unknown sets of opportunities for the stuff that's true to your core, I think is absolutely correct.
Yeah, it comes back to, and this is not a cliche in our company, we are a family business. So if I go back to those family ethics that my father had instilled in the business from day one, they still run true today. It's a balancing act now when you become a very big company and you're dealing across different countries, different ethnic bases, and that there's challenges at times, but those core values is exactly what we're talking about. And I guess the only way I can say is you're sitting on a doorstep of doing an interview 24 hours later. I think you're talking from the heart more than the head necessarily, but there is that little bit of balance. But it was a commitment to us to not walk away from all those people, and even some of the farmers that maybe we weren't their first choice or weren't necessarily enamored with us. When you're not there, they also don't realize what they haven't got when you're not there, because their marketing options were limited. So it was it had far-reaching impacts, but today we're proud to say 2.5 years after starting, we're up and running.
So just to, with all of this happening, you had the fire, you had COVID, but at the same time you're still growing options in the US.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that as well. But I'm just intrigued about this notion of a family company that is growing, and yet you still got to keep an idea of your core values as you get really big.
So I guess what we could see as we were growing, you have to sell that product. And I'm remembering back to this paper I did with my MBA, the company, it was actually Clipsal, looking at Clipsal's growth and how they grew in their markets. Did they start up on their own in a market, or did they partner with a best in market? Did they buy their biggest? So I looked to, going back to there, I looked to partner with our best customer at that time in the US, which is a company called Foodcom, started by an Aussie, Greg Burke, in the late 80s. And they were sort of the premium chilled lamb and beef importer, but they really just imported boxes and distributed into food service, a bit of retail, or sold to people who went down and did that next, production for retail ready. So that gave us our first foray. And the US has been another big inflection point. That company now nearly turns over $2 billion US, 800 employees, and that's all happened since 2010. Why the US? I'm still got an old retired footballer, still got a competitive streak in me. It's incredibly competitive market to do business in, but it's got growth. Not to throw snow. We've got 2 or 3, 4 major retailers here. We have tens of customers there. So it is competitive, but it was also about investing down the value chain and in what I thought was one of the biggest, most competitive markets. And if we've taken that model and replicated it in China, Europe, UK, Canada, Middle East, and other.
And the US, I think, is also an interesting case. There are very few other markets like that where you have, it's a conglomerate of mini markets. I can't recall the stat, but it's something like if California was a country, it'd be the 5th largest economy or whatever, and Texas would be the 7th, or, and so you're also in a position, I think, if you're smart about it, of being able to, as you folks have been, competing harder in a smaller domain, and then building out from there. I was curious about, did you say 800 people in the US operation?
Yes.
So how do you manage for those lenses, being a family business that's become big, and so you've got kind of the corporate overlay that's sort of somewhere in between that, and I'd imagine there's all that kind of dynamic tension.
Absolutely.
How do you instill or manage those decision frames that we were talking about? Or how do you ensure that the folks that are operating on the ground in the States or further afield to live in the values that you would espouse?
Yeah, and we work hard on that, but it's about, making sure that we select the right people. Our CEO in the US, Michael Forrest, does an amazing job. Some of the people there, I'm running off tonight for a dinner. Wegmans, one of the most iconic grocery outlets in the US. They are iconic, and I'm meeting them, but come out to Australia. So it is about people. And again, it's not a cliche. The whole way through, when Dad wanted to start exporting, he grabbed a young Frank Picaro off one of the slaughter floors in the offer room, and he said, "You're going to be our export manager." And Frank didn't know what that was. So it's a two-way thing. Picking someone with passion and a brain, but then you've got to set them up for success.
Yeah.
So one of my things, I'll hear a lot of people come in and say, "Oh, such and such isn't working out." And I said, "Well, first of all, let's back off before we worry about them. Have a look what you do. Have you set them up for success?"
Yes.
And sometimes you'll find out, or the company doesn't have to be an individual. Sometimes people don't work out, but a lot of the times I get more of a thrill when I see we turn someone around, or we turn a division around, or a manager around, because it's very easy to say. It's not, you've got to look at yourself first, or look at the business. But having people, so I do, I don't sleep a lot. You start your day talking to the US, you end your day talking to the US and every other country in between. But if I look at the people, and we've got some great stories in our industry, everyone, I'm not sure meat processing is the first industry someone would think from a vocation at school. And I used to do talks to the schools in Murray Bridge for a reason, because the principal might say, "Well, little Johnny or Jill, if you don't behave, you'll end up down at the meatworks," instead of saying the opportunity. So a couple of our senior people in the US started as cadets working on one started as a receptionist while he was at uni, trading in the US. Some of our senior people started in the Larrages. Now in our business, you've got AI, robotics, you've got pharmaceuticals, the opportunities that our business, and then on a global scale for people, it's not just you'll end up at a meatworks.
It's so interesting when you start scratch under the surface of a category. I'm reminded of somebody else that you'd know here in Adelaide, Andrew Downs. Built
great story.
Downsy building out, a Sparky great building story. Out of his shed. I think now that business is, he's exited that business. So 800 and some in staff and on the same basis, it's kind of, you could view that as, just go and work and be a Sparky. And then you go and visit the facility and actually, it's a little more complex than that.
Yeah.
So it's about people and opportunities, really.
100%.
Right talent. I was going to, just to round up though, I was thinking, you mentioned your dad's a jackaroo, you go out bush, you see all these people, you're a family company. Do you think part of the success is really just that face-to-face interaction with people and being able to spot BS and do something about it, and knowing how to get the best? You mentioned that character that you got off the floor and made a manager. It's managing the growth of the company is largely about that.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, if you look at it, I would say Dad and Bob in the early days, we shouldn't have got off the ground. You had these big corporates that were in the meat industry, and how did we beat them? Well, checkbook in the back of and a lot of thousands of kilometres, renting a single engine Cessna, going there with the station owners, paying for the cattle before they left the plate, all these little different things we could do. And then if you look at today, it's about that face-to-face. We had some King Island farmers over the other day that, Dad and I carted them around for 2 days. You think, here's the two most senior person in the business. They're carting some farmers around. So we're incredibly aware that that's where it all starts. But then tonight at last minute, I'm running over to have dinner with some customers or I am overseas just about every second week in front of our customers. And that came from the early days, Dad allowing me in particular to travel and see our customers and not only meet the customers, but understand their businesses. And when you're dealing across 85 different countries, there's so many different cultures, ways of life. So I consider myself really fortunate. I've never seen colour or race in my life because from a very young upbringing, I was exposed to so many different ways. We all have our own beliefs and that's fine, but I'm very tolerant of the way people see the West and, some of the people, the migrants that have helped build this country, as we know, but also with us in 2004, when we brought the first lot of Chinese migrants into we could have never delivered what we did at Murray Bridge without them. So I have a very different lens on that. And when it comes back to people, that's a very broad statement, but none more true than in our business.
There's one other sort of insight there that I draw out that I see so often, and I think it's compared to other markets or geographies that I've worked in, it's one of the things that stands out in Australian business in general, is so many folks here have that if you build it, they will come kind of mentality. So there's this overweight obsession with product or service. And if I look at this, like what distinguishes, let's say, the US and the huge scaling opportunity some of those companies have is the obsession with customer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key differentiating factor in businesses that grow. And if you're going to understand customer, means you need to understand people. So
Correct.
It's not a surprise, right?
Yeah. And then look, you've always got your own self-interest, but I think it's been fortunate enough over many, 20 odd years now to be to just about every corner of the globe. You do get a sense of understanding. I mean, you've still got to run your business. And I've always been one to front up. So if there's a problem, I'm more than happy to accept the responsibility, but I like to do that face to face. And I think one of our competitive advantages and what I'm told by our customers, the unique, if I take Sam's Club and Walmart, huge, but I get access to the CEOs of those businesses and it's so good for my learning. Today I come back from the US and I've had a meeting with Walmart or Sam's Club and I'm that excited because I've learned something. You can always learn. So you wouldn't do that. Very hard to do over Teams. Whilst it's an accepted medium now, the online thing, but it cannot replace that face-to-face.
Face-to-face, yeah.
Well, we better let you get to your dinner. I dare say steak's on the menu tonight.
I hope so. Look, it's surprising. I don't actually eat as much meat as people do, but I do love a good steak or lamb.
Well, enjoy it tonight. Thank you for
Thank you so much, Darren. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at www.centreforbusinessgrowth.com. And a quick reminder that you can always tune into the Growth Trust podcast series on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Bye for now.